The South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners says the lack of black professionals involved in the Mooikloof housing project is regrettable. President Cyril Ramaphosa launched the 30 billion rand infrastructure development project on Sunday. Now, the project is a public-private partnership between Balwin Properties, the Gauteng provincial government and the City of Tshwane. For more on this, I'm joined by Tholo Makhaola, President of the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners. A very good afternoon to you, sir, and thank you so much for your time today. Now, when we're looking at, thank you, sir. Now, when we're looking at the press release that you have put out, you say that what you are unhappy about is the president's endorsement of this project. If you could just unpack what you mean by that.
Thank you very much, Tammy. What we need to understand is that government, by partnering with private developers, is in a position to actually dictate, our feeling is, to private business certain outcomes that they want out of development. President Ramaphosa was quite explicit in acknowledging the fact that COVID-19 had a very harsh impact on the economy. He spoke about an infrastructure-led economic growth strategy. And in our minds, we see the megacity development just as that. So what we're saying is we don't feel that government has leveraged enough have not used this opportunity to leverage private business into bringing the majority of our people, who are the black people and black property practitioners, into the fold in developing a project of this magnitude.
One thing, Mr. Makhaola, is that this was not a tender process. This was a private business, a private company that had initiated this development and then approached the various government stakeholders to partner with it and to support it. Is this not an issue, perhaps, of a lack of proactivity or proactiveness from a black business to initiate similar projects if that is what you are wanting?
Interesting you should say that, Tammy. So I think one thing that we're very clear about is the two inhibiting factors that inhibit black individuals from developing projects of this nature is, number one, access to land, and number two, access to finance. And I think we understand that with the past that South Africa has, that if you look at the access to finance aspect of it, financial institutions, the lending practices that they have put in place just do not favor black property practitioners. And in terms of access to land, I think one then starts to appreciate that they just aren't, our country just isn't structured in such a way that we have a lot of black individuals that have access to the land that is required to develop these kind of developments.
Is that not perhaps one of the things that black property practitioners can come together on, but also elicit partnership, maybe even from government, to be able to acquire that type of land, or maybe perhaps even other business partners to actually bring this to fruition? Because if you look at this, it does on some level sound like perhaps a case of sour grapes, perhaps a case of why did we not think of that sooner or put a project of this magnitude together?
And that's completely understood, Tammy. However, I think it just needs to be clear that we are under no circumstances have any sour grapes. In fact, I think one of the things that we do say is that we welcome this development. We welcome the fact that there are a lot of jobs that are going to be created. However, our feeling is simply that there are a lot of inhibiting factors structurally that inhibit black property practitioners and individuals generally to this kind of access. And I think you're spot on as far as saying that it is a partnership between ourselves and government. And I think as black property practitioners, we are in constant communication with government to try and see how government itself can start to assist black individuals in terms of access to land and access to finance.
Because what is also clear from this project, and based on just the research going through it, is that government is not funding this project. It is an independently funded project. But what government is going to be doing is providing those individuals who will be wanting to buy that middle, cost housing with perhaps grants and abilities to be able to afford this type of housing.
100%. And I think, so for us, the message there is simple, that we can't allow black people to continue being consumers of housing products. We also need to be involved in the supply value chain of the creation of these kind of opportunities and in the building of these kind of houses. So I think for us it's simply trying to understand what are the transformative ambitions which government sets for themselves that they have passed on to private developers. Our bottom line is that all property developers should be required to fulfill the same requirements of transformation and of BEE, and it should not be optional if and when they want to.
If you look at Balwin Properties, for example, as I said earlier on, an independent company that put this together, are you then trying to ring fence how business should take place? There's a difference, I think, between initiating a project out of your own volition and then responding to a tender. What is it that black property practitioners are going to be doing to ensure that you are also able to participate in initiatives such as this?
I think we're quite clear in terms of us wanting to create our own opportunities. And I think, as I've tried to reiterate, the access to land and the access to finance being the two biggest inhibiting factors in terms of property practitioners and property professionals coming together to create these kind of developments.
But I just want to come in here, Tholo, and just ask, yes, how long are those barriers going to remain? Like, how long are we going to keep on using the same excuses, even though they are valid? Because yes, there are restrictions. There is, lack of access to the land. There are barriers to entry as far as finances are concerned. But are we not really at the time and at the point where we ought to be trying to find solutions to those type of barriers?
I completely agree with you 100%. And I think as an organization, as cited, that is essentially what we're trying to drive. And the only way we can drive that is in partnership with government. And as I've stated, and Dr. Ramaphosa has stated this, that projects of this nature, they are still taking them on. And I think it is up to black professionals, and we are encouraging professionals who are in a position and who do have access to the required land and to the required finance to start to create those projects for themselves. I just think that it should be clear that once we start having these kind of projects, then we're starting to learn and we're starting to see. But the bottom line is the lived reality of individuals on the ground still remains the fact that they battle to access these two things. And you ask, how long are we going to keep using the excuse? And in my mind, it's simply up until those two stop becoming barriers, and the lived reality of black people is simply that they start to access those as easily as their counterparts.
Mr. Makhaola, you made a reference there to Dr. Ramaphosa and a comment that he made, and we were looking through Twitter and reading some of the comments, because hashtag Mooikloof is one of those hashtags that has all of South Africa talking. So let's turn to Twitter and see what South Africans have to say regarding this particular development. We start with this one first from Lekker Dizikal. King Kudza saying, I personally want to understand how money is moved once it's unveiled or reserved or allocated by government. Did the developer already receive or get paid, or is now when the disappearing happens? Just asking so we know who to ask questions later. Otherwise, I'm hopeful. I think there, King Kudza, it's perhaps worth noting that government is not necessarily paying for the development to happen, but what they will be doing is they will be providing grant services to those who qualify for that housing. And perhaps let me give you an opportunity to perhaps interject here. Perhaps you want to comment on this, Mr. Ramaphosa? Mr. Makhaola, sorry about that.
Yes. Yes. So I think I think just to be very clear, and I think you've just really made a poignant point. I think it is private money. However, we just need to be clear that the developer is also taking advantage of a lot of the grants that are being offered for people who fall within the brackets that the developers identified. So I think it's very clear that there is a lot of ingenuity involved in the development itself. But from our side, I think the feeling, like I'd like to reiterate, is simply that we don't want to simply be consumers. but we'd like to be involved in that supply value chain and the development and the creation of these opportunities. And I think that's what we're working towards as black property practitioners.
Great. Before we let you go, just a few more of the tweets. We've got one saying we should be focused on asking relevant questions like how much is the government going to cough out on this project? Why don't we have journalists who are prepared to ask if this administration claims to be transparent? Journalists ask those questions and then you will hear. I think we've pretty much clarified how this is working there. The Blessing writes, no questions asked about who are the companies awarded Mooikloof 30 billion rand project. Someone break it down before we are told when the project is completed, list those companies. I think it's worth noting there, Mr. Blessing, that it's actually not a tender at all, but it is a public-private partnership, so it wasn't a tender process. The last one is from Sibu saying, congratulations to Balwin Properties and your Mooikloof development. The work must continue, but do not approach the project in a typical private sector mentality of greed and profit. There has to be a balance, otherwise you will not realize what you set out to achieve. Coming back to you, Mr. Makhaola, are there perhaps opportunities that could exist, maybe subcontracting? Has your organization perhaps tried to make contact with Balwin Properties to see how maybe black practitioners can be part of it? It really is, after all, a very large cake, and I'm sure there will be slices to go around. Is that an effort that you've made?
Absolutely. Look, I think that is definitely our next step. So the two next steps that we've identified is to make contact with the office of Dr. Cyril Ramaphosa, who earlier on has indicated that definitely we could contribute to this process, because I think that there's a lot of things that government perhaps maybe overlooks when launching these kind of developments. And I think I did mention that sometimes you find that the issue is simply government's lack of communication. So if they take us into their confidence and we're quite clear about processes that are going to unfold, then there'd be no need for us to have to question their intentions or question the intentions of any such development. But I think also our next step is definitely to contact Balwin Properties, just to understand and just to ensure that there is a transparent supply chain process that kind of has been put in place, and to ensure that there are people, that the relevant people do get access to the relevant opportunities.
Before I let you go, some quarters may think that perhaps your organization or just black business in general feels entitled. What would be your response to that?
Absolutely not. I think one of the things that we are quite adamant about is that, I can speak for Simon, we represent a professional group of black property professionals, property practitioners, and that spreads across the value chain. And I think what we're saying, because the old adage is simply that there is no competent black professional that can undertake certain skills, and I think we're basically just trying to change that. All we're saying is that we're competent, we have the skill sets, and we just need to either create opportunities for ourselves, or we can be brought into the fold on opportunities.
Lovely chatting to you, sir. Thank you so much for your time. That's Mr. Tholo Makhaola, the president of the Black Property Practitioners.